But first, Arab and Islamic leaders are gathering in Doha for an emergency summit after Israel struck the Qatari capital last week. The strike killing 5 Hamas members and a Qatari security officer, narrowly missing the negotiating team considering an American proposal for a ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. The meeting serves as a pointed show of unity among Gulf and Middle East countries and is seeking to increase pressure on Israel, with attendees considering a draft resolution. The Qatari Prime Minister has described last week's strike as state terrorism and urging the world to reject what he calls double standards. It comes as US Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that he will be heading to Doha tomorrow. Joining in the studio is Philip Turle, our international affairs editor. Philip, Qatar hosting this meeting of Arab and Islamic nations in the hope of presenting a united response to that Israeli strike. But how successful are they going to be?
This is where it's all a little bit more complicated. There are 57 states taking part in this meeting, which is a large number of states representing the Arab world. And the problem is that many of them don't see eye to eye on what exactly the measures that can be taken are. And if you look at the final draft resolution, which hasn't been signed yet, but which is expected to be signed and given out later today, it's very critical about what Israel has done. They say that the countries that Israel is seeking maybe to attack, to try to wipe out Hamas, have the right to their own sovereignty and should not be victims to attack like this. But there's no collective agreement on what kind of action can be taken, and that no diplomatic condemnation about what's happened. And I think also no sign of any of those countries wanting to cut diplomatic relations with Israel, because they have interests, economic interests, which are tied into their relationship with Israel. One of the areas where there may be some kind of wriggle room is with the Abraham Accords. This is seen as being really the supreme diplomatic achievement of the first term of Donald Trump as President of the United States. He wants to pursue this, maybe even bring in other countries like Syria, Lebanon, and above all Saudi Arabia. There could be more reluctance of those countries to join the Abraham Accords. Maybe some of those who have already signed an agreement with the United States to renew relations with Israel or set up relations with Israel may threaten to withdraw from the Abraham Accords. I think that is one area where there is some kind of room. But I think what all these countries definitely want is for these attacks to stop. They say that Israel has become really unleashed, and it cannot just take into its own hands trying to wipe out Hamas. When this actually happened, this attack, Hamas was considering a ceasefire proposal from the United States when this attack happened in Doha.
Philip, let's just pause there, because in a visit to Jerusalem today, the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling reporters that Washington would indeed provide unwavering support to Israel in the war in Gaza, as he called for the eradication of Hamas. Standing next to him, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Rubio's visit was a clear message that Washington stood with Israel, while praising President Trump for his backing, calling him the greatest friend Israel had ever had. It comes as Rubio said plans by Western nations to recognise a Palestinian state would indeed embolden Hamas. Charlie James has this report.
America's top diplomat flew to Jerusalem to discuss the war in Gaza with Israel's prime minister and showcase U.S. solidarity. But after Israel's attack last week on Hamas members inside Qatar, Marco Rubio has to walk a thin line. His visit coincides with an emergency summit in Qatar of Arab and Islamic states in response to Israel's strike, some of them close U.S. allies. When questioned whether he asked Benjamin Netanyahu to not repeat the attack in Qatar, Rubio dodged the question.
We are focused on what happens now. What happens next? What role can Qatar play possibly in reaching an outcome here that leads not just to the end of this hostilities, not just to the release of all of the hostages, both living and deceased, not just the disarmament and elimination of Hamas, but also a better future for the people of Gaza. And so we're going to continue to encourage Qatar to play a constructive role in that regard.
U.S. officials have said that Israel's strike in Qatar does not advance Israeli or U.S. interests, and U.S. President Donald Trump is angry over the attack. But Netanyahu would not rule out further strikes on Hamas leaders wherever they are.
I'll tell you what the impact of the strike is. We sent a message to the terrorists. You can run, but you can't hide, and we'll get you.
Rubio and Trump met with Qatar's prime minister on Friday to discuss the situation. Trump has made it clear he wants the war in Gaza to end, but Israel's strike has thrown cold water on the Qatar-hosted ceasefire efforts.
And with me in the studio is Philip Turle, our international affairs editor. Philip, how exactly should we translate these comments by both Marco Rubio and Benjamin Netanyahu?
Okay, let's put it this way, shall we? Anybody who thought there was going to be a falling out between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, well, they're going to be disappointed, because after that meeting today between Benjamin Netanyahu and Marco Rubio, it appears that all of that is now over and done with. Any comments that Donald Trump may have made that he was angry or disappointed with the Israelis for bombing Doha haven't really come to anything. So that's why I think Benjamin Netanyahu is feeling emboldened by this. I mean, it is quite an extraordinary situation when you consider that the United States says it wasn't told that these attacks were going to take place, that they were discussing on the ground there, Hamas and regional leaders, a U.S. peace plan for the Gaza Strip. Israel went ahead with that bombing raid without informing Donald Trump, and all Donald Trump said afterwards was, well, I'm very disappointed with Benjamin Netanyahu. But from that press conference, one can see that that's really all he said, and that the two nations are still shoulder to shoulder. And Marco Rubio saying that the only way out of this is for Hamas to say basically that it can surrender and let the hostages go free, and then we can decide what we're going to do next. So no let up in the bombing raids. And it looks even as though the US has swept under the carpet the idea that Israel should not be allowed to launch attacks against Hamas positions, maybe also in Egypt, why not in Turkey while we're at it, and elsewhere. And the United States probably wouldn't be against that idea.